There are so many moments in Berserk where the page just stops you. A splash panel of guts, the main protagonist, sword raised, standing knee-deep in a field of corpse, or sitting against a tree, or laying down on the floor. No dialogue, no exposition, just a single image that feels heavy. And it's not because it's violent, but because it means something. And that's the secret of Berserk. It's not your typical dark fantasy. It's a masterclass in visual storytelling. In case you are not too familiar with the manga, Berserk is, well, this guy's video pretty much sums it up.
Berserk, Volume 1, Chapter 1. Holy hell. This shit is awesome. I started to tear up. I had to put this fucker down.
If you want an extended description, Berserk is a landmark seinen manga series set in a brutal, medieval-inspired world, and it's centered around a character named Guts, a lone mercenary born from a corpse and raised on battlefields. Also known as the Black Swordsman, Guts travels a world-torn landscape to hunt down demons in a quest for revenge. He wields the Dragon Slayer, a massive slab of iron, and is haunted nightly by spirits drawn to the brand of sacrifice etched into his skin. Yeah, this manga is insane, I know. But Berserk isn't just a story about trauma or revenge. It's also a visual epic about existence. Kentaro Miura, with a mechanical pencil and a godlike sense of composition, built a world where every frame carries the gravity of myth and every silence is louder than a monologue. When people talk about Berserk, they often focus on the story's darkness, the violence, the tragedy, the gore, and sure, it's all there. But that's not what makes Berserk one of the most important visual narratives of the 21st century. No. What makes it great is how it's told. The way Miura used scale, silence, posture, contrast, line, and motion to make the page itself speak. He could have just used panels to contain the story, but instead, he used them to carry its soul. Let's take a closer look at how Berserk uses the frame as a weapon and a tool for building emotion, meaning, and myth, one page at a time. Let's go. Sensei! Obviously, you cannot talk about or understand Berserk without mentioning the man behind it all, Kentaro Miura. Kentaro Miura was not some tortured rock star artist who stumbled into greatness. He was a working maniac. Miura started drawing manga insanely young. We're talking childhood. By his teens, he was already assisting professional mangaka. And here's the important part. He didn't rush. Berserk wasn't designed to be a hit. It wasn't chasing trends. It wasn't trying to be edgy for attention. Miura was obsessed with craft. He studied European medieval art, Renaissance paintings, Gothic architecture, classic fantasy illustration, but also film composition. The man was basically reverse engineering visual storytelling like, okay, why does this image feel holy? Why does this one feel terrifying? And instead of simplifying his art to meet deadlines, he did the opposite. He made Berserk harder to draw, which is insane from a business perspective. Most artists simplify as they go. Miura added more detail, more texture, more lines. That's why Berserk chapters took forever. But here's the thing, that obsession is on the page. You can feel that this wasn't rushed. You are reading the product of someone who cared too much. Miura was not interested in simply telling a story and be done with it. He wanted to etch it into you. Funny enough, for a gory dark fantasy, violence is not the first thing you feel when reading Berserk. Nah, what you feel instantly is the gravity. Every panel feels heavy, and the tone of the overall story and the subject matter are part of the reason, but it's also because of how Miura composes the world. It draws with impossible detail. Gnarled stone, gutted cities, clouds that stretch for miles, monsters that seem to spill off the page. Take the first appearance of Nosferatu Zod. This is not a fast and flashy reveal. Miura pulls back. Zod fills the frame vertically, horns scraping the sky. Guts, by comparison, looks like a stubborn ant with a sword that's way too big. No exaggerated speed lines, no dynamic pausing, just raw scale. Your brain immediately understands, oh, this man should not win this. Later on, during the eclipse, this idea becomes cosmic. The apostles dominate the page. Some of them don't even fit cleanly into panels. Limbs bleed into gutters. Teeth and eyes break frame boundaries. That's not accidental. Miura is telling you visually, the world no longer contains what's happening. And then it does something cruel but brilliant. It gives you wide shots. Instead of chaos, it gives you wide and horrifying clarity. You are forced to sit with it. No quick cuts, no mercy. These pages are also dense. They feel ancient. Every stroke adds age to the world. And by the way, Miura absolutely knew when to chill, because right after some of the most soul-crushing imagery imaginable, it'll cut to Puck, God's tiny and goofy health companion. Miura is breaking the tension like, yeah, existential despair, but look at these idiots. That contrast matters. Berserk works because it breathes. Also, I love how Miura uses scale to establish his world's oppressive systems. Militaries, churches, fortresses, castles. These aren't just random locations or backdrops. They are drawn stone by stone, crack by crack. It's the same with armies. Miura doesn't just sketch soldiers in vague blobs. He draws every face in the crowd. You are supposed to feel the weight of war pressing in from all sides. The Battle of Doldry could have just been another battle in your typical manga, but instead, it feels like a wall of metal and flesh. A clash of ideologies told through page density. Guts on horseback alone in the middle of an army of thousands. That panel doesn't need words. The geometry does the work. And sometimes the word just swallows Guts. See what I did there? Miura shows Guts resting under a tree, or walking through snow, or standing in the aftermath of destruction. These are not plot moments, they are weight moments. They tell you Guts is tired, alienated, stubborn, and alive. The frame itself becomes a reflection of his state. This is why Miura's panels often feel slow, even when violent. It gives you space to sit in awe or dread. You feel what Guts feels, not through dialogue, but through how the word looms above and around him. If Berserk is a story built on suffering, then Miura's greatest act of restraint was not how much pain he drew, but how often he let pain exist in silence. He knew that not every wound needed a scream, not every breakdown needed a monologue. Instead, he turned to the most powerful tool in the manga medium, posture. Because in Berserk, how a character stands or collapses often tells us more than anything they could say. One of my favorite moments in the manga is when Guts wakes up after the events of the eclipse. After Guts realizes what just happened, we get multiple pages of Guts running in the forest, reminiscing and crying, stumbling all over the place. Those pages do not have any dialogue. They don't need to. The frame itself does all the talking. You realize that you are watching Guts trying really hard to run away from the pain this event has caused him. And the more you flip through the pages, the more the framing makes you realize how trapped the main character is. Trapped inside his pain and trauma, with nowhere to go. There is no escape. Then there is the back of Guts. There may be no recurring image in Berserk more loaded with meaning than Guts walking away. It happens again and again, sometimes after a battle, sometimes after an argument, sometimes after simply surviving. always from behind, always with that massive sword strapped to his back like a cross. It's a posture of loneliness, of resignation, of unspoken rage. That repetition turns posture into language. When Guts leaves the band of the arc at the end of the Golden Age arc, for example, Miura doesn't fill the page with exposition. He simply draws Guts walking away from Griffith and Casca. No dialogue, just the sound of wind. The panel holds, and that silence hurts. Later in the Black Swordsman arc, Guts walks through villages and forests in the same pose, always away, always alone. The sword never leaves his back, and the world never seems to welcome him. Guts' back becomes a symbol of guilt, of grief, and of the life he's been forced to carry. You don't need dialogue to know how he feels. Miura trusts you to read body language, and that trust is rare, especially in manga or comics. Miura's treatment of Casca, particularly after the eclipse, is a masterclass in emotional minimalism. Post-trauma, Casca barely speaks, but Miura gives her pages of emotional space, white panels where she clings to herself, stares at nothing, recoils from touch. Her silence says a lot. Beyond being a result of trauma, it's also a storm held beneath the surface. And through Miura's framing, tight panels, cautious white space, we feel what she cannot say. And of course, there's also Griffith. He's calculated, composed, and dangerously charismatic. And yet, his most revealing moments are often his quietest. After his fall from power, when he's rescued, skeletal and broken, Miura draws him staring at his hands, unable to speak, barely able to move. A once godlike figure now reduced to shadowed silence. Even before his transformation into Femto, Griffith is often shown staring out windows, standing atop walls, or sitting alone in massive rooms. These panels don't fill us in with inner monologue. They simply show his isolation and the growing anger behind his mask. Miura doesn't tell us Griffith is dangerous. He shows us stillness, and that stillness becomes unbearable. That's where his studies of film composition come into play. Because it's not just the character's posture, it's where Miura puts the camera. These visual choices can be seen as psychological punctuation. Miura knew when to zoom in, when to pull back, and when to shut up entirely, letting the reader sit in emotional discomfort, in grief, in weight. In this way, Miura uses negative space like a character. Emptiness on the page reflects emotional vacancy. When words stop, feeling starts. Miura understood something most filmmakers forget. Sometimes the most painful thing you can do to a character is let them sit in silence. And sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for a reader is trust them to understand. No exposition, no thought bubbles, just posture, framing, and pain. Unlike a lot of manga, reading Berserk doesn't feel like watching an action scene. It feels like being inside one. There's no animation, no sound, no music to drive momentum, just ink and paper, and yet, somehow, you feel every blow, every block, parry, scream, and swing. That's the genius of Kentaro Miura's kinetic storytelling. Miura choreographed action like a master cinematographer and executed it with the line work of a sculptor. Every panel was part of a rhythm, a visual pulse that accelerated across the page. Let's break down how Miura creates movement and physicality while maintaining tension with nothing but line. God's sword, for example, is heavy, yes, but besides being drawn to be big, it also feels heavy. That's because Miura draws it like a force, not a prop. It's rarely centered or clean. It arcs, it drags, it whips through space with a control like of grace. The edge blurs, the impact distorts the frame, bodies don't fall, they are shredded or pulverized mid-motion. Take any fight scene, like Guts versus the possessed horse demon, or his battle with the sea god's tentacles. The panels don't isolate poses like a flipbook. They bleed motion across frames. Blades slice through multiple panels. The backgrounds curve around the attack, and the line thickness changes mid-swing. It's as if the panel cannot contain the force of what's happening. Miura often delays the impact of a strike. He shows the moment before, the shoulder twist, the grit of teeth, the swords rising, and then cuts to the results: a shattered wall, a sliced demon, or a cratered ground. This creates mental impact. The reader imagines the force that must have connected those two images. It doesn't always need speed lines, because the pause is the it. The space between action and consequence is where your brain fills in the violence. It's psychological motion. Miura's panel layouts feel like an expert editor built them. Long horizontal panels emphasize swings and distance. Tight vertical cuts emphasize urgency and claustrophobia. Full-page spreads drop like visual bass drops, pauses in rhythm that demand you to stop and absorb. He understood pacing. A fight might open with chaos, wide panels, overlapping motion, and then snap into tighter frames as the danger escalates. Or vice versa. A still moment might explode outward into a sweeping action shot. And crucially, Miura knew when to stop. Right after a kill, right before a counterattack, right in the silence between breaths. That's storytelling through panel rhythm. Miura's action also goes beyond the physical, as they are meant to be emotional as well. You can track Guts' state of mind in how he's drawn mid-battle. When he's controlled, you get tight and centered compositions. When he's wild or desperate, you get flailing arcs, sharp angles, backgrounds that lose structure. When he enters the Berserker armor, you get chaos. The lines thicken, the frames tilt, the sword arcs in jagged sweeps. It's less choreography, more primal violence, communicated entirely through form. And then there is stillness, the most powerful motion in Berserk. Guts standing in a pool of blood, sword resting, a body falling in silence, a page without panels, just aftermath, just still air. Miura understood that sometimes the most kinetic moment is the one where nothing moves at all, where we are left staring at the cost of violence. Kentaro Miura could do the impossible. He made manga move, he made weight felt, he made action mean something. And he did it with a pencil and a fundamental understanding of how to lead the eye across the page, and he didn't need speed. All that was needed was intention. Reading Berserk is like walking through a cathedral carved in blood. Every panel is devotional, every page an altar. And while the story it tells is brutal, violent, and often horrifying, it's also shockingly human. What separates Berserk from so many other dark fantasy stories is, in my opinion, the world building. And even Guts himself, the main protagonist. The world isn't afraid of feeling hopeless. Guts isn't interested in being righteous all the time. Like when in the Conviction art he uses a child as bait. Is it heroic? No. Does he care? No. Did Kentaro Miura put in enough work for the audience to understand Guts' flawed sense of heroism? Absolutely yes. It's so fitting that the protagonist's name is Guts, because the manga has a lot of it. The fact that Kentaro Miura cared so deeply about how the story was told visually made Berserk what it is. He didn't just draw what was happening, he drew how it felt. Miura treated the panel like a sacred object. He respected composition, he honored silence, he gave characters space to suffer without exploitation, to rage without chaos, and to be alone without abandonment. In Berserk, every visual choice, from the thickness of a line to the angle of a frame, carries meaning. Even as the story plunges into horror and cosmic despair, Berserk never becomes nihilistic. And that's the final triumph of Miura's visual language. He made a story about suffering and framed it with dignity. In a manga overflowing with trauma, injustice, and cruelty, it's the small human moments that are framed with the most care. These moments are quiet, often wordless, but they are sacred, and Miura treated them that way. When I say Berserk is one of the most visually powerful stories ever told, I'm not just praising the art style. I'm recognizing the fact that Miura used the tools of a manga to reach beyond the page, to touch something elemental, to create a story not just of swords and demons, but of myth and meaning. He showed us that a panel can pray, and in doing so, he gave us a story that will never die. It's no coincidence that we haven't had a proper anime adaptation of this masterpiece. They made a decent anime in the 90s, but just like the animated trilogy, it is mostly focused on the Golden Age arc, and that's because studios want to capitalize on that epic eclipse event. But that's exactly the problem, because Berserk is much more than that. It's a lot different than a typical manga, and I personally do not think an anime will be willing to replicate its visual language, because that language is not very marketable, which means we will probably never get a proper anime adaptation. But that's okay if we are being honest, because the manga is perfect and enough. Although Kentaro Miura tragically passed away without being able to finish his story, I am not too sad because I never saw Berserk as something that desperately needed a conclusion like a One Piece or Attack on Titan. The manga is perfectly fine with an imperfect ending because that just adds to its mystique and realism. The point of Berserk was never about whether Guts will get his revenge or not, at least not to me. It was always about going on an adventure with a character that carried the weight of pain and regret on his back, and watch him fall and get up and overcome that burden over and over again. Kentaro Miura already accomplished his mission by making Berserk one of the most beautiful and impactful manga ever drawn, and for that, his name will forever be remembered. Thank you for watching.